All right, guys, so basically this is probably going to be a two-part video, and this part is going to be focused on the idea that the Pac-12 and the ACC could possibly be forming some type of alliance to freeze out the Big 12 from poaching teams from both the Pac-12 and the ACC. So this would be kind of an alliance between the ACC and the Pac-12. And then, guys, probably later tonight, I'm going to release another video talking about the other side of the coin, because there literally is one site that is saying basically two polar opposite things. So it's like when I release videos and they look like they contradict themselves, it's because you have one person saying one thing and then three other people on the same site saying another thing. But I had to buy the subscription to The Athletic, I think that's what it is, because they just got all the realignment stuff. It's only $1. I had to get it. But you can see this article. Pac-12 is getting itself back out there after being burned, and then it references Clemson versus Utah, Miami versus Oregon. It's hinting at a possible merger of the ACC and the Pac-12 to make sure both of those conferences survive and, in essence, freeze out the Big 12 possibly. You can see it says the Pac-12 Conference appears to be moving towards a loose partnership of some kind with the ACC right now. A loose partnership doesn't seem too optimistic in my opinion. I think the only way forward, if you want to be a big player, is to go into a full-blown merge, meaning the ACC merges together with the Pac-12. Geographically, it makes no sense, but the geographic stuff went out the window when two schools from California joined the Big Ten. So this idea that it's a loose agreement, I'm not liking that wording. This tells me that they're really, this discussion, it doesn't seem like it's going very far if you're doing an alliance type thing, similarly to what, the Pac-12, the Big Ten, and the ACC did last year to counter the whole SEC expansion of Texas and Oklahoma. The alliance thing was ridiculous. It lasted 1 year, and nobody believed in it, and then the Big Ten ended up just poaching the two best teams from the Big 12, from the Pac-12. So this sort of alliance wording, you need to merge. If you want to be a big player in college football with where the Big Ten is, and the thing with the merge that teams aren't going to like, you take the best schools from the ACC and you take the best schools from the Pac-12 and you merge them together, and that's your third super conference. These alliances, this is not going to work. The Big 12, they're trying to prevent the Big 12 from poaching Pac-12 schools and ACC schools, but mainly Pac-12 schools, because we know right now there are currently meetings between Utah, Colorado, Arizona State, Arizona, Oregon, and Washington. They are talking to the Big 12 about a potential move. I covered that in my last video. Bob Thompson, the former president of Fox Sports Networks, told me on Tuesday that a potential Pac-12 partnership with the ACC captures TV markets that include 28 million households. By comparison, the Big 12 television markets have only 14 million households. If you put the geography aside, the ACC market is just better. Why a loose partnership and not a formal merging of the ACC and Pac-12 into one of these super conferences? I suspect that's due to the ACC's current grant of rights agreement that runs through 2036. And I've talked about it several times, their horrible agreement with ESPN, but if it also says if the ACC opens the grant of rights, it runs the risk that one or more conference members. Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. If they get out of that, okay, so that makes sense. That's why merging these conferences is basically impossible because of that media rights agreement through 2036. It would make sense for Clemson to break that agreement and go to the SEC. It would make sense for Florida State to break that agreement and go to the SEC, because the SEC's TV deal is going to be so much greater than a potential merger of the Pac-12 and the ACC. Logistically, it wouldn't make sense for these schools to break that. That's why I guess it's this article is saying, that's why it would have to be one of these stupid alliances where basically you're in an agreement, possibly maybe you have the conference championship game, one versus the other, but it's not a formal coming together and creating a super conference, which is really what you would need to do at this point. But I think the whole idea of this alliance would be based off of the Pac-12 and the ACC realizing, hey, it's 2 versus 1. We know the big two. We know SEC, Big Ten are always going to be the big two. Why do we have to let the Big 12 just stomp over both of us? We can come together. 2 is greater than 1. We can form an alliance and prevent the Big 12 from poaching our teams. But again, guys, this theory seems very questionable right now because there's a current meeting going on between 6 of the Pac-12 schools and the Big 12. Possibly the Pac-12 schools moving to the Big 12 with major sources saying that the Big 12 is obsessed with expansion and they want this done quickly because the Big 12 wants to be the 3rd super conference right now. This is very interesting. What I like about a potential ACC and Pac-12 partnership stabilizes the Pac-12, keeps its remaining 10 members together, and gives the conference media rights negotiations a boost, positions the Pac-12 ACC solidly as the number 3 entity in the new landscape versus being left out. Exactly. If this alliance forms, it muddies the water significantly because right now we're looking at 3 super teams, 3 super conferences, the 3rd super conference being the Big 12, and the thought process behind the Big 12 super conference forming is poaching teams from the Pac-12. So the Pac-12 is trying to make sure that doesn't happen. That's what this alliance would do, and it would also give their TV deal a little bit of a boost if they form an alliance with the ACC and you see a matchup like a Clemson versus a Utah and things like that. You don't want to get trampled. You don't want to get left behind. The Pac-12 is basically out of options. This seems like their only legitimate option. Again, guys, take this with a grain of salt, I would say. This whole idea, this seems like the Pac-12 is just throwing stuff at the board and seeing if it sticks. I don't blame them. They're fighting for survival. This is their survival instinct right now. But guys, people are going to say when I release these videos, if I do them back to back, because I'm filming another video, you're contradicting yourself because my next video is going to be on the Pac-12 possibly getting just destroyed and Mountain West teams possibly poaching teams from the Pac-12. But I'm telling you, you have literally 2 articles released the exact same day from the exact same website, both with polar opposite opinions. So I'm trying to give every bit of intel. This is the first side of it. This is what the Pac-12 is trying to do. They're trying to do anything they can to keep, especially Oregon and Washington, in their league. That's goal number 1 for the Pac-12. Keep those 2 teams in your league. And then you can see fosters interesting and marketable crossover matchups. Clemson, Miami, Florida State, and men's basketball, Duke and North Carolina. But, I mean, those teams would have to face... The Pac-12 has a horrible basketball league. I don't know about that. What I don't like, the last alliance situation led to a gut punch, and I don't think the ACC programs are going to be thrilled about being dragged into it. Yes, the ACC programs would rather merge, right? The good ACC programs would rather merge with the Pac-12, but they can't do that apparently because of their media rights deal. But they could leave for the SEC because the SEC is going to be making so much more money because of their super conference, because Alabama, because Texas, because Oklahoma, because A&M, all of those teams, Florida, the list goes on and on. They're going to make so much money. They could breach that contract like a Clemson could leave and say, we're just going to the SEC. We'll pay the massive fee we have to. We'll pay it because we're going to make even more money in the SEC, but they would not make that money breaching the contract in a potential merged conference of the best Big 12 teams and the best ACC teams. A Pac-12 ACC tandem doesn't scare the Big 10 and the SEC. Yeah, but it was never going to. You cannot think like that. Right now, the other 3 Power 5 conferences have to be thinking survival. you're not going to beat the Big Ten or the SEC at this point. They're too powerful. You need to stay relevant. You need to survive. The Pac-12 is on the brink of collapse. The Big 12 is sitting pretty right now. They're meeting. They're trying to poach Pac-12 teams. And the ACC is teetering a little bit depending on what happens with Notre Dame and the Big Ten. And the SEC possibly looking towards expansion and poaching Clemson, Florida State, Miami. Those three other Power 5 conferences. It's not about being better than the Big Ten or the SEC. It's about survival at this point. These are some extra things today. This is his working theory. Pac-12 partners with the ACC. That would very surprise me. I would be surprised by that. I think the Pac-12 gets crushed, but this is the author's theory. I respect it. I get it. Then Pac-12 pursues several key Big 12 members. Baylor, Kansas, Houston, Oklahoma State. That version of the ACC Pac-12 would be very interesting to ESPN in football and men's bat. I think you're living in La La Land. I think you're living in, I don't know about this, guys. Think about it. It's definitely the Pac-12's best option at this point. The idea of keeping Oregon and Washington together by having an alliance with the ACC, which would boost up your negotiation power and make you more money in your TV deal negotiations that have been expedited and are happening this month. It just seems like desperation. There's so much stuff talking about the Pac-12, but apparently this person thinks that the Pac-12 will partner with the ACC in some sort of agreement to preserve themselves. The ACC preserves themselves, and it wouldn't be a formal, like a merger. It would be an alliance type thing, I guess, because of the media rights deal. Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah appear to be interested in what they're hearing from the Pac-12. An AD at one of those schools told me there were no scheduled meetings with the Big 12 this week. I don't know what source he's looking at, but there's been several people that have reported that those 6 schools have meted with the Big 12 yesterday and today. So I'm not sure about that. There are a number of okay, this is an interesting tidbit. A number of mid-major universities that have reached out to the Pac-12 about joining the conference. Fresno State, Boise State, SMU. I'm guessing San Diego State would be another one as well. So that is interesting for the Pac-12. Let's say the Pac-12 loses those 4 teams that we talked about to the Big 12, you would have to replace them with Mountain West teams, and at that point, you're down to 6 teams in conference with both Oregon and Washington guaranteed on their way out. So you're basically left at 4 teams. It's a total disaster for the Pac-12 if they lose Utah, Arizona State, Colorado to the Big 12. It is a total disaster. So guys, I just wanted to share this. What is the Pac-12 doing right now to try and fight and try and keep their conference relevant? My next video, it might, unless something big happens, I might just release it tonight at like 7 o'clock Eastern, I think. And that's going to be the one that I agree with the next video. I think the Pac-12 is getting destroyed. It might just completely dissolve, but this is what I want to show you guys. This is an article. This person thinks there's going to be an agreement between the Pac-12 and the ACC to preserve themselves, which at that point, the Big 12 would be getting shut out. That would be very interesting, and I think that would at this point, I mean, what can you really say? The 2 super conferences are so much better than everyone else. College football is so unbalanced with, Oklahoma and Texas and USC and UCLA making the expansion moves. But I think this is our only hope at some sort of balanced college football, to where if you shut the Big 12 out, at least you've got, 2 good conferences in an alliance to where we get some cool matchups like Clemson versus Utah, things like that. This is probably our best chance, because otherwise the Big 12 is just going to trample the Pac-12 and form the 3rd super conference, and the Pac-12 gets crushed, and then we look towards the ACC, and they would be in kind of in a pressure cooker situation, depending on if the SEC wanted to expand to 18 or 20 teams. And I think that would be, again, maybe the SEC wants to go for it either way, But I think that would be mainly based off of if Notre Dame joins the Big Ten and then the Big Ten takes other teams, the SEC would most certainly want to expand and get to the same number of teams the Big Ten is at. So guys, this is just one way to look at it. It certainly makes sense for the Pac-12. Interesting scenario, a possible alliance between the Pac-12 and the ACC. They're fighting for conference survival right now. And it's so... You got to respect them for it. It's sad that college football has come to this, and really just college sports in general. This is going to affect every sport, college basketball as well. So, guys, make sure you're following me on Twitter. I should have probably another video depending on what happens. If there's big news, obviously I'm going to scrap the next video. I'm just going to do the big news. But the next video is going to be about the Pac-12. Probably, I mean, I haven't seen the article, but it looks like maybe dissolving completely based off of what they're being told. So we'll see, guys. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.